Welcome to the Omnibus Podcast, a weekly breakdown of political news inside and outside the Capitol. I'm your host, Jeremy Munson, a former state representative from southern Minnesota, and joining me today in studio is former Representative Tim Miller, he's from Princeburg. He represented Swift, Chippewa, Renville, and Candy, Ojai counties. Today, Tim is actually in town, passing through, living in an RV full time, and he's staying here at the Munson compound for a couple weeks. So we decided to cut a show to talk about some hot topics. We're going to talk about moving the presidential primary up to basically invalidate the endorsement process, which might happen next year. And we're going to talk about Otter Tail County, that mess that's still ongoing, and some news, unfortunate today for the Senate Republicans. Republican Senator Justin Eichorn was arrested, not yet charged, but likely will be for solicitation of a minor. So it sounds like there's going to be a vacancy in the Senate, and we have a mess in the House with a tied vote in the House. So let's get into it. So Representative Miller, Tim, welcome to the show.
Representative Munson, Jeremy, it's really a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you letting me join you in this. This is exciting for me.
Yeah, well, I've not had any. I've done podcasts for years, but I've never had somebody in my house. We brought this mixing board and everything up to the Capitol when I was up there. We cut a couple episodes in my office up there, but it's exciting to be online instead of over the internet. But so I put on the wide angle lens, and hopefully the audio is going to work today. But
yeah, as you can see, I got dressed up for camera. I didn't know we were going to be on camera. Not that I would look much better, but probably would have worn a different shirt. But Door County here, or no, Egg Harbor, yeah, up in Door County, Wisconsin.
Yeah, so tell us about living on the RV life, man. So you sold your house in Princeburg when you retired from the legislature, and how's it been?
We sold everything, gave away everything, and we're still officially transitioning into full-time RVing. That's fancy before we jumped the gun a little bit. And the biggest thing we had to complete yet, well, not complete, but my wife teaches, and she had to teach in person this year. We're working towards other plans for next year, probably teaching online. That's not yet guaranteed. So I'm here right now. My wife is back up in district. She teaches in Hutchinson and Wilmer. And so we've been kind of juggling that, but it's been great. We just last week, the reason why we're here at the Munson compound is I was up all winter in the state of Washington, took a 6-day trip, all three of us, plus 2 dogs and 2 cats, and went down through California, across on Interstate 80, all the way across the U.S., and ended up in Lake Crystal, Minnesota, just in time for cold and 50-mile-an-hour winds. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm stuck on you using the word transitioning, which a lot of Republicans don't use that very much nowadays. And then I also got caught wind that here you got this conservative Republican from Minnesota that casts and moves out of the state. And where do you go? You go next to Portland in liberal Washington.
We have family up there. That's what put us up there. But yes, I will tell you that I did not spend a great deal of time in Portland, but if the Twin Cities is a mess, I don't know how they can do it, but Portland is times 2 at least. It is a real dumpster fire.
Yeah. Well, we had George Floyd, but they had to outdo us, even though they didn't have George Floyd. They just still burned their city down. Crazy. Well, let's talk first about what happened on the news today with Senator Justin Eichorn. We both served with him. I personally didn't know him very well. Met him on a few occasions, and just finally a couple weeks ago had a conversation with him because he was an honoree of the Legislative Evaluation Assembly because of his conservative voting record. That's probably the most I've talked to him. But it was in the news today that the Bloomington police had done an undercover sting operation where they lure someone in online. I don't want to say lure. They go out and
it's a sting operation where they. So I don't know how they do it in Bloomington, but what I have seen, I've watched some documentaries on these or just some YouTube, stories about how they do this, and they set up an operation like a police department would do, but they don't lure them in per se. They look for people saying things on social media, and then they pose. A police officer poses as usually an underage girl and starts a communication. We don't know the story on this one exactly yet, but if it's typical, there's been a conversation between Senator Eichorn and what ended up being a police officer, probably at least for a little while, to the point to where there was this intention to meet up, and when he showed up, it was police officers there.
Yeah, well, it's sad and it's disturbing and inexcusable. And I quite immediately went out and made a call for him to resign.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that there hasn't been a lot of Republicans that have talked about, he'll resign once Senator Nicole Mitchell resigns. It's different, and you have to set an example. You have to lead by example. So he should resign, and immediately. And if he doesn't, the Republicans should call for an ethics investigation. And he's afforded due process, so he needs to focus on that. He's got a wife and I think 4 kids, and he needs to focus on his defense and everything else that's happening in his life. And he doesn't need to be working on creating laws.
Yeah, and there's a standard to be expected in the legislature, and he did at least enough for sure that crossed the line, or he caused enough trouble to where he does not need to be a distraction. And as you said, he needs to take care of the things in his life. So it's really an easy call. I saw through a news story that the leaders of the Republican Party in both House and Senate have already called for him to resign. I'm sure there's been a lot of conversations in person, so I don't know where that's at. Maybe that's already happened, but that certainly needs to happen. When I was in the legislature, perhaps a lot of the work that I did, the work that I was most proud of, was in sexual assault and actual human sex trafficking of children. And so I know the laws well. And listen, it appears that he crossed a line that's just simply not acceptable. And I only hope that Minnesota has very strong laws when it comes to this stuff. The execution of it isn't as strong. Now, because he's such a high profile, are they going to make an example of him, or are they going to hold him to the standards that he should be held? I don't know, but I hope so.
And there's room for error if it was a complete misunderstanding, or there was if something happened, then I would expect something to come out in the news from Eichorn's side here in the next couple of days. But barring that, he needs to resign. It's not cut and dried for all cases in people being accused of something. If it was a he said she said thing, or some intern from 10 years ago had made an accusation, I might call for due process and some more investigation. But the fact that this was a police sting, and we've seen so many of these things go down with so much evidence and pictures exchanged, text messages recorded, I expect this to be pretty clean for evidence wise.
Yeah, well, we'll see how the process goes. But this was a bad day in Minnesota.
Yeah. And it's hard to not talk about this. It's hard to talk about the story and not talk about the political ramifications for it, because this is such a crazy legislative session where we started out the year where the Senate was tied because we had a death in the Senate on the Democrat side, bringing the number of senators on both sides to an equal number. And then in the House, we had, of course, the Republicans had a 1-seat majority, but the Democrats knew they were going to pick up the seat in Roseville. So they're basically tied. And now, the Republicans had a majority, but they wouldn't let them pass anything because they didn't have 68 votes. And now we have this issue in the Senate where Republicans will be down 1, but maybe now that they're down 1, they will allow Senator Nicole Mitchell to either resign or give her the boot, so that they'll still be in a majority, but not have a governing majority.
Yeah. I can't imagine being there this session. I've talked to some of the members, and it's bad. If we have time during this, I would like to discuss. You and I know the process, and there's a lot of things that enter the news. A bill is introduced, it passed the floor or whatever. But as you and I both know, the conference committees at the end of session, where the House and Senate get together and they formulate really the final bills that go before the governor. If we have a little bit of time, what's kind of it? Because that's where the ramifications show up. With now we have a 67-67 tie in the House, and that's in. barring something new coming down the road. And right now in the Senate, the Democrats have a 1-seat majority with the presumptive Senator Eichorn resigning. For a while, that'll be a 2-vote majority. I don't know how that special election will work out. Senator Eichorn was in a pretty strong Republican district, so we'll assume the special election is Republican. But even with that, the Senate still has a Democrat majority.
Well, let's before we talk about the legislative rules, let's talk about the special election. So the process for that is if Senator Eichorn resigns or if they remove him through a vote of the majority in the Senate, they will have to declare a vacancy to the governor. And then the governor, if they declare a vacancy to the governor and pass a resolution, then the governor can call a special election he has to call a special election within like 4 or 5 days. And then that will be, filing period, be at least a month of voting. And so we're still looking at, the end of April, probably by the time that person gets seated. The natural people look for who's going to run. They'll look to the House members in that district. Josh Heinzman, Republican. So there's 2 Republicans in that district that represent it. But they can't leave the House to go and run for Senate, because if they are elected to the Senate, then there's a vacancy declared in the House. And that would be in the final weeks of the legislative session in May, right when they're finalizing all the budgeting and stuff, where they can't just give the Democrats a majority during that time on the floor. So,
but based on the state Supreme Court, even if the Democrats have a majority in the House, they don't have 68 votes. And they've already declared that you need 68 votes to pass anything, which could be a whole podcast episode. There's a lot of things that are going on right now. If people haven't figured this out yet, it seems like in Minnesota government, they kind of make things up on the fly. And it's usually supported by the state Supreme Court or the Secretary of State or the governor. And so expect the unexpected. It's sort of cliche, but expect that this year. But this is a budget year, and we constitutionally have to pass a balanced budget, and we have about a $6 billion plus deficit.
But not in this year. That's in the
biennium. So they have to account for that $6 billion in this next budget that they pass this year. So I have my opinion of how they're going to do that, and it's not pretty. But we'll see. But yeah, so the legislative process is going to be very clunky. It is going to come down. So just very briefly, House passes, Senate passes. You have to get same language. This is just schoolhouse rock bill stuff. But what happens is they form a conference committee with the House and Senate members based on who is the majority, which plays into this. And then they put together a final bill as a conference committee, let's say in education.
Well, let's back up. So they pass a budget from the House, which is an equal split. Expect it to be fairly bipartisan, although Democrats tend to be better negotiators. So you'll have a bill that passes the House. The Senate, which is controlled by the Democrats, they'll reject a lot of it, add a bunch more pork, and so the bills won't be the same. And so then they'll go to a conference committee. The majority leader in the Senate will choose a majority. So let's say they're going to pick 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans to be on the conference. 4 and 1 from the Senate. So 4 Democrats, 1 Republican to be on the conference committee. And then the House, the power sharing agreement in the House says that the speaker gets to normally choose a majority of her party and then a minority of the other party. But the power sharing agreement that the Republicans agreed to at the beginning of the session, even though they were in the majority, was that the speaker will choose an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. In other words, the Republicans, even though we had the speakership and we had a majority for the beginning of the session, we have no negotiating powers. We're going to have an even split. So basically, we're handing the majority vote on the conference committee to the Democrats on everything that passes the legislature.
That's exactly right. Yes.
So basically, we're everything that's going to pass this year is going to be decided by the Democrats. And of course, you always have the governor now, who's a Democrat, who's going to veto anything he doesn't like anyways, or in a budget, line item veto anything that the Republicans want to get in there.
Now, what you could have, I don't anticipate this, but the conference committee report goes back to the 2 chambers for final approval, final vote, right? And you need 68 votes to pass that bill. in the House. So in theory, the Republicans could all vote no on that. And even though it's a tie, it dies. But then you get into
who's going to shut the government down.
Who's going to shut the government down? And I can tell you, history shows two things. Number one, the Democrats do much better in messaging during a shutdown, and Republicans typically get an inordinate amount of blame for it. So a lot of pressure.
Yeah. So the conference committee report has to come back to the House and Senate, and they both have to agree before it goes to the governor. So yeah, and it doesn't take it all. It will only take one Republican who will cave. Probably have to loosen that. One Republican to cave to vote for that conference committee report.
All right. Thank you. Little technical problem there.
Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic with the majorities and the slim minorities. And, at the beginning of session, I thought, man, if somebody is, Me Too, that was the big issue when there was a tied Senate, is every senator has to watch everything they're doing to make sure that they aren't, keep their health up, don't miss session, and watch what you say, watch what you do, and they're going to come after you any chance they get.
Yeah, and Jeremy, what I'm telling people to look out for, I've talked to a couple freshmen in the legislature and that have never seen any of this before. Not that we've seen what we currently have, but the process through the end of session. You might get on a bill, some wayward Republican that says they're going to vote for the bill, but what's more likely to happen is you and I have been in the caucus room. Mm-hmm. And this can get complicated for people. You're intelligent enough listening to this, but if you haven't been there, it can get a little bit confusing. But they're going to come into the Republican caucus room and say, listen, we had to cut a deal with the Democrats because we have to show that we can govern. And there's some things in there you don't like. There's some things that you will like. But in the end, we have to join together on this. We all have to vote for this bill. So I anticipate the conference committee bills to be passed with by the lion's share of the Republicans.
Do you anticipate there being a super garbage omnibus bill this session?
And yes. I think that's probably the only way they're going to be able to pass a budget like this.
So you anticipate a big omnibus bill coming at the end of session, probably bunching stuff together. Basically, at the end of session, it's going to be how do we explain to the people of my district why I voted for this garbage? Or do we say, you know what, just pick the two squishy Republicans who are in swing districts and let them vote for it and let all the other Republicans vote no?
I think it can go a lot of directions. One thing I have also told these Republicans, anticipate voting on a bill that increases taxes and increases spending in a deficit year. And they're like, I'll never vote for something like that. Just be careful because they put you in a bind. And I know that you should vote your conscience, but I'm not excusing it. I'm just telling you what is. And there are going to be people that say, listen, we have to vote for this or the sky's going to fall. And not only do I have to vote for it, but so do you, because we have to do this together. The end of session is going to be pretty wild, but it's not going to end well for Republicans. I can tell you that.
That's sad. It's really sad. And there's so much, front and center on all the policy stuff this year is this focus on fraud, and that there's so much fraud. And we got this major trial going on with one of the largest federal fraud schemes in the country, right here in Minnesota, with the Feeding Our Children thing and the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from taxpayers. And now there's another thing with the healthcare fraud with hundreds of millions of dollars being overbilled for Medicaid and Medicare. And when it's discovered, Minnesotans have to pay that back because we are state agencies that take federal dollars and funnel it through and put some matching funds on it. If we commit fraud or the people in our state commit fraud, the state taxpayers have to pay that back. The federal government wants their money back. And so that just has to come out of our pocket even more. So it's that was some of the pushback I got from Republicans when I talked about fraud in St. Paul, is they said, be careful what you unearth because you're gonna have to figure out where we come up with the money for it. It's just sad because it's continuing. The childcare fraud, everything else is still continuing.
I witnessed we kind of lump it all as fraud, waste, and abuse. And it's because the different terms fit a little bit better for different things. But we have verified auditing that shows fraud, waste, and abuse in so many areas. We've witnessed it, and then yet on top of that, there's a bill in the Senate, and I don't know where it's at, but there's a bill in the Senate it was like $2.2 million to go to a nonprofit. And the president of that nonprofit is the spouse of the senator who wrote the bill. And are they going to see $2 million? Probably not. Are they going to see $500,000? Good chance.
That's sad. Well, let's jump to one of what I believe is one of the most dangerous bills coming to the legislature. It's not gun control. It's not a tax increase. It is moving the statewide primary to March of next year. So, in politics, if you want to run for office, you can announce you're running, go and meet with all your local Republican Party affiliates or all your whatever party you're in, and seek the endorsement. And then the party rallies behind that candidate. You get signs printed. The local party helps you put out signs. They help you walk in parades. It's a very grassroots effort to support that candidate. And then we have a partisan primary in the middle of August for all the offices statewide and local. And that decides who's actually going to be on the November ballot. And so at least you have for state representative or state senator, your endorsement happens in about March or April. If you're Congress, it's usually April. And if you're running for a statewide office like U.S. Senate or one of the governor or attorney general, that endorsement is usually at the end of May. So if you move the partisan primary from August until March, when you have the statewide convention in the end of May, the only person you can endorse is the person that's going to be on the ballot, right? You're not going to endorse somebody that's not on the ballot. You could choose to not endorse someone, but it basically negates the endorsement process. Now, the first question you say, well, why can't we just move up the convention to, January? Well, because caucuses are in February, and that's where you go to your caucus and you run to be a delegate in your party and go to your county conventions, which happen in March. And so there's a process that you can't move back beyond the caucuses. And the other solution to that is, well, maybe we could move the party's convention to the year before, which would be using the delegates elected 2 years before. It might work, but if you had the convention in November, between November and March, there's no parades, nobody's putting out signs in the wintertime, and the public at large just they don't want a year-long campaign.
Yeah. So what I'd like to see, this actually first showed up when I was in office in 2016. There was an elections bill, because this is all going to have to be passed through the legislature. And it was proposed to have a June primary. And there is some validity to having an earlier than August primary. If you're running at a federal campaign or a statewide campaign, there's a lot of outside money, a lot bigger than any of us have, that realistically has to come into these races. And if you're running for Congress and you don't know who won the primary until August, the money just isn't there. So Minnesota is always kind of lagging behind. It also puts governor candidates on the Republican side disproportionately behind, because then they basically have to sprint to the finish line after Labor Day. So that's a fair problem and a fair question to say, let's move it back. I know there's also a bill out there now, I believe, that says it might be in
June.
In May.
There's one Jeff Howe's bill in the Senate, and it was carried by Quam in the House, moved it to March.
Right.
And then Coran has a bill to move it to June, I think.
Is it June? Okay. Yeah. So what I want us to have, though, especially in the Republican Party, where the grassroots really are a lot more important than they are in the Democrat Party, in the process anyway. Yep. Let's be intellectually honest and let's have the conversations, and let's include the grassroots in this conversation. When we get to Otter Tail, we can kind of point out as to some of the problems that we have at the grassroots. But you have people that are earnestly, I would not have been elected without the grassroots. So I really like the caucus system. I appreciate some people would prefer a primary system, okay, which is essentially will be a caucus system. If they move it back, will be a caucus system, but it's going to be the primary, as you're mentioning. Let's have an open conversation about it rather than try and sneak it through, because you're going to have a lot of disaffected Republicans who are going to be told after the fact, as always, well, we have to unify behind this. We have to move forward. We have to do this. And if there's a June primary, I think the grassroots will still have a role. It'll be diminished, but they'll have a role. But they move it back further than that. There really is, as you mentioned, there's no point in that system at all. We're just going to go to a primary.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why the endorsement process is so important in my mind is because it allows anybody to run for office. You can just, if you got gas in your car and you can go around and have coffee with people all over the district, you can build support among the grassroots, and the party should be able to choose its candidate, right? If you want to run as an independent, you're not a Republican, then run as an independent. The problem with having a primary only is that it really comes down to whoever can spend the most money to influence the larger group of primary voters who aren't paying as close attention to the politics as the party faithful. And so you have people that can just come in and want to spend $1 million and basically buy a seat.
Well, and you have groups like the Chamber of Commerce or the Minnesota Business Partnership, or what we call we call it a couple different things, but the big money in the Republican Party, or the caucuses themselves.
Yep.
So the story in my race, when I lost in 12, I ran again in 14, won the endorsement, but the House Republican caucus wanted the guy that ran against me endorsement. He was a school teacher. He was a varsity basketball coach for over 30 years. He was a good prototype that they look for out in greater Minnesota, and moderate. I'm not moderate. They always seem to like moderate for some reason. And when I won the endorsement in May, and he's looking at a primary in August, he was looking at that whole summer of parades, like you said, of county fairs, all those things, especially in rural Minnesota. Well, if he had a primary coming up 2-3 weeks later, he would have rolled the dice. He has nothing better to, he would have been fine doing it. They would have told him to do it, and they would have bombed my district, spending $50,000 to $100,000 to make sure that he won the primary against the wishes of the Republican base. Now, if that's the way you want to do it, again, I just say be honest about it, and and I don't agree with it. I'm just saying that if you want to take out the grassroots, that's how you do it. But be honest, that's what you're doing.
What also bothers me about the situation, because it's being passed legislatively, it's not going to a ballot, is that every legislator in St. Paul would benefit from invalidating the endorsement, because when we were elected, you have name recognition. You have so much name recognition because you're always out there and you're doing the media and radio and everything else, and people know your name. And if you're in office for 10 years, it takes so much. The value of your name recognition in a little house district might be $50,000 worth of name recognition. You don't have to spend a penny. And if somebody wants to run against you in a primary, they have to spend at least $50,000 to try to build up that name recognition. Plus, on top of it, run a campaign. It's really hard to get someone out. So everyone in St. Paul has a self-interest in eliminating the endorsement and going to primary only. And that's what's frustrating as a grassroots person, is you look at that and say, it's just not fair that they would get rid of the grassroots. Now, in the short term, it benefits them because they can win re-election through the primary. But the problem is that by invalidating the endorsement, you also get rid of people who participate in the party process and walk in parades and stuff. When they move the presidential primary, or when they move the presidential primary from August to March, they basically said, okay, we're going to take away the presidential straw poll at caucus. People used to go to caucus to cast their ballot in the presidential straw poll because that showed who Minnesota wants to elect for our Republican candidate.
You actually attached national delegates to that straw poll.
Yeah. Yep. And so it was influential when they took the presidential straw poll away from the caucus and they had a March presidential primary.
Nobody showed up.
No one went to caucus. You showed up and there was nobody there.
Yeah.
And so basically everybody that went there got to be a delegate, plus people were filling in dozens of names of people. It destroyed our party. And not only, I mean, there's other ramifications too with the presidential primary and publishing people's party affiliation and stuff like that. But they're going to destroy the party. No one's going to show up. There's going to be no grassroots. It'll be just the Chamber of Commerce and all this outside money just mailing it in and choosing their candidates. And if you think that the Republicans are rhinos now, or you think that they're not principled enough, just wait until you take away the endorsement in Minnesota. We'll have no principled Republicans left. So I'm against it. Now,
I'm against it as well.
One of the things that I think you could change is that we don't need 6 weeks of early voting. Currently, you have 6 weeks of early voting, and that's when you run in a primary and you come out as a victor in the primary in the middle of August, the ballots for the November election are delivered just a couple weeks later because of early voting.
Yeah.
And in rural Minnesota, we have a lot of people that live in, like I don't have a local place to vote. I have to vote by mail. And so you have a lot of ballots being delivered, hundreds of thousands of ballots in Minnesota being delivered just a couple weeks after the primary. And for someone who supported the primary candidate who lost, there's a lot of healing that has to go on, and it takes some time. And so I can understand trying to move the primary up for that reason. But as Tim said, the outside money, the national groups that would contribute, they don't want to spend money on a candidate that's in a primary, because if they lose, then it's wasted.
Well, and the biggest problem, there's lots of problems with early voting. First of all, I just fundamentally think it goes against the American way. But with early voting, elections have become about collecting votes, right? So the Republican Party and the Democrats are way better at it, by the way. But you go out this last year, I was on the state party board. And our whole goal was, you don't get out the vote in the sense of getting people interested in voting. You literally identify who the Republicans are. And there's a process by which you can tell if someone has not voted. Now, you don't know how they're going to vote, but since there's the presidential primary and you now know who the Republicans are, you know which Republicans haven't voted yet. And you literally communicate to them, sometimes in person, sometimes through mailings or emails, and you say, get your vote in. And it really takes away from the whole process, whether it be primary for the party side or general election. It takes away from the whole intent of how our electoral process is going to go. And so I agree that the early voting, I honestly don't know how you get rid of it. I'm skeptical that you can, but it's a huge problem in all of this. And if you again, federal races and statewide races, I get moving it back, and maybe June is an okay time to do that. But then address this with the grassroots, and how can we make it more palatable so that the grassroots can stay involved and engaged.
So one of the reasons why this is so extremely important of an issue for next year is that we have a gubernatorial race. Tim Walz has kind of declared he's running for governor again. Peggy Flanagan, our current lieutenant governor, has declared she's running for U.S. Senate in a seat that Tina Smith is announced she's not running for re-election. So that's an open Senate seat. And we're going to have several Republicans running for U.S. Senate. We'll see who comes out. But already Julia Coleman has basically announced she's running. She's making the rounds. Kristen Robbins has announced she's interested. Those are both sitting. So Kristen Robbins is a House member. Julia Coleman is a state senator, daughter-in-law of Norm Coleman, former U.S. senator. And both of those candidates are extremely moderate. They're some of the most moderate Republicans out there. And they have very little chance of winning the endorsement. And so they would either have to completely bypass the endorsement, like what Pawlenty did several cycles ago, and potentially lose against an endorsed Republican candidate if the endorsement was in August, or she would, or they can. So I see this as moving the primary up in order to allow these sitting legislators a chance of running for governor in running for U.S. Senator.
Yeah, and the establishment Republican Party has been very frustrated by the grassroots. They think we're too conservative. They think we lose elections. They think we are just a problem. They want to, I don't know, professionalize the whole process and, in effect, not only pick who they want, but make it virtually impossible. And you're right. It's just by nature, it's going to move to a much more moderate candidate, which, again, if the Republicans, that's who they want, that's fine, but make the process honest in determining who that candidate is going to be. Because you're right, Senator Julie Coleman's not going to win an endorsement process for the Senate. She's just not going to.
And, when we saw a few weeks ago, there was a gubernatorial candidate that came to Mankato. Well, he hasn't announced he's running for governor, but he very, very likely to. And I put out on Facebook, hey, I'm going to meet with this guy or person. What question would you have for them? And, a lot of people asked about abortion, figure out a path to run for statewide office and just not talk about abortion. Well, it's hard not to talk about abortion because it is a political issue that happens to be the most important issue for maybe 25, 30% of Minnesotans on both sides of the aisle. And you can't have no position on it. And at the same time, if you do try to thread the needle, if you want to be a Scott Jensen this time around and say that you are pro-choice and just admit it, they're still going to attack you because you side with Republicans who are pro-life. And so in politics, it's so difficult to be bipartisan or have positions that are not of your party because they're going to attack you anyways, because Democrats know that the 3 to 4% of voters who are going to make the difference in an election that's always tight like Minnesota are the people that follow politics the least. And they're not going to have watched the debate, but they're going to see the mailer that says this Republican this Republican candidate for governor is going to take away your right to abortion, whether they have said that or not.
Well, and they did it. So by election time, they were saying Scott Jensen is going to ban abortions in Minnesota. And he was openly saying that he was pro-choice.
Yeah.
So I didn't like it either because I'm extremely, pro-life. I mean, that's what my heart and soul is. I wrote legislation on it. So he's getting, it was a double whammy for me. Yeah. He's getting tagged for something that he doesn't believe. And I do, but it's a bad thing. I was like, so in a way, I don't blame Scott Jensen for being frustrated by that. But no, and there's other issues like that. And I don't know how we're going to work through that. And by the way, I know that for candidates, the endorsement process, I would jokingly say that the endorsement process was more brutal than the general election. And there was some truth to it, even at the state representative level. They have very high expectations for you at the grassroots, but that's a good thing because they're engaged. I found, so someone were to raise the question, so how do you make this work? At its source, it's not that complicated. I found that if you are genuine with people, this is not trite. If you are genuine with people and you're willing to have the conversation, it really benefits you in comparison to when you just try to stick to some talking point and you don't answer questions, because then you become disingenuous and then they don't trust you at all.
Yeah. Well, I found a good segue to our next topic. And if you leave the process as is, you leave the endorsement process as strong as it can be, led by the grassroots, and if the endorsement process is allowed to hold a candidate till the August primary, it actually strengthens the endorsement. Well, the natural reaction of the establishment, of the people that don't want the endorsement process, if they can't move the presidential primary, they will just corrupt the endorsement process by taking over the BPOUs with establishment people, running the local Republican parties, choosing the chairs of the convention that screw up the rules in order to corrupt the endorsement to either have a no endorsement or to just invalidate delegates. And we've all seen these things at conventions. When I ran for Congress, I know you weren't at my endorsing convention because you were chairing the CD7 convention the same day, but it was a really ugly endorsing convention where the establishment pushed to have a no endorsement. And it left a really bad taste in my mouth, and it soured a lot of delegates to the endorsement process. The next cycle in CD7, we saw the same thing happen. We have in CD7, the chair of CD7 happens to work for a candidate, one of the Fishbach, the candidate, and it leads to a corrupted process, and if at the very least, an appearance of a corrupted process. And the chair of Otter Tail County also worked for Fishbach. Otter Tail County is the largest BPOU in CD7, has about a third of the delegates for the entire for the entire delegation. So very, very important. And that problem in Otter Tail County has been festering now for many years, and it blew up during the endorsement process in the last cycle, where Fishbach had a contender running for the endorsement, and she was fearing that she would lose the endorsement. And
he had a lot of support in Otter Tail County of the delegates that were elected this last precinct caucus.
Yep.
And so things happen. I think what you and I both very strongly agree on, you touched on it with the chair of CD7 being an employee of Congresswoman Fishbach. If the state party really needs to address one thing for sure, we should not have executive board members who are also employees to elected officials. And it may sound like we're getting a little bit petty or really technical, but it's not true at all. The role during a non-election cycle, the role of a CD in specific, and is what we're talking about, congressional seats, the role is to certainly support our Republican congressman or congresswoman. But it switches when you get into a campaign. We are there to facilitate the process. And there is a bias, naturally inherent bias there. It's nothing about the personalities. There may be personalities involved, but you have these congressional offices. Well, if that's the case, why are we doing an endorsement?
Right.
Then because it's kind of like they're setting it up. They're kind of rigging it.
So to give you an example, the Congressional District 6, Tom Emmer's congressional district. When you're a congressman, you get to have staff in the district to handle constituent services and stuff like that. So they are official staff that work for the House of Representatives. In CD6, Bobby Benson is the congressional district staffer for that district and gets a, well over $100,000 salary supporting the congressman in that district. Bobby Benson is also the chair of the Republican Party for the 6th congressional district and oversees the endorsement of anyone who wants to run for Congress in that district. Now, he's directly employed by the congressman, and he's also in charge of the endorsement process. There's a conflict of interest there. Last cycle, there was someone that wanted to run, but was fearful that if they announced too early, that they're not going to get a fair shake. So they decided to kind of do a last minute thing and run for the endorsement. And that failed. They were shouted down at the convention and they weren't allowed to speak. In CD7, the chair of CD7 works for Fishbach. This last Saturday here in CD1 in southern Minnesota, Congressman Finstad, several of his staffers were elected to lead the 1st Congressional District party. So the chair of the 1st Congressional District is now a staffer of Finstad.
Well, and at the very least, I don't begrudge someone having a job in a congressional office, but there's a lot of good-hearted, smart, intelligent people that are engaged in the party that don't work for a congressman or congresswoman that are very qualified to be a chair or be on the board or whatever. Give them the opportunity. We just don't have to have all this. It raises problems, which we should address. But at the very least, why do we have to have everyone involved with the same things? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
You had said that the role of the party is to support the congressperson, the elected congressman, during the off year. While I think it's important to share the message of the congressperson, it's also important to hold that elected person accountable to the principles of the party.
Good point.
If you endorse a candidate, if you endorse Tom Emmer to be your congressman, and then he goes to Washington, D.C., and he votes for gay marriage and a bunch of other things that he voted for that the people of his district didn't like, they deserve that. They look to their party leader to tell them what's going on in Washington, or, hey, maybe we should, send Tom Emmer a message and say, don't support the national the national popular vote, or whatever it is that he's supporting that's against the principles of the party. You have to hold your congressperson accountable, or at least be a little bit more independent. And if you want to run for Congress in CD6, you're not just going to announce in January of the election year. You're probably going to announce a year before. So when Steve Boyd announced he was running in CD7, Craig Bishop, who worked for Fischbach, he should have stepped down his chair and said, I have to step down because I work for the Congresswoman and I'm going to lose my salary if she's not reelected.
You also have, if you want to dig into the weeds, not too far. So the Federal Election Commission, which oversees campaign finance at a federal level, it's like the IRS times 10. They are very strict on things. And one of the things that they're strict on is there has to be a very definitive wall for a congressman or congresswoman between their legislative side and their campaign side. And when you have a chair of a CD, you're already blurring that line at the very least. But then when you get into, I saw in CD7, and there is no way that Michelle Fischbach's campaign lead person was not talking to the chair on a regular basis. It's the time of year. That's what you have to do. Well, that puts you in conflict, because you shouldn't be talking about the campaign if you are working for the congressional side. That poses problems. And I haven't seen anything come of it. I'm not wishing anything come of it, but I go back to, why are we creating these conflicts when we don't have to?
Right. A couple of years ago, I had talked to some people in Rochester that were upset because the last chair of CD1 was also an employee of Finstad, and they wanted to make a change to our state party constitution, or our congressional district constitution. And the proposal was that you can't be on the executive board at any level of the party if you are employed by a candidate, if you're an immediate family member of a candidate, or if you work for the House of Representatives or the Senate, and or if you're paid by a consulting firm that a candidate can employ. So it basically would remove that from the party, which would help which would strengthen the grassroots, because I think we're seeing a trend of the establishment coming in to corrupt the endorsement process, and that is the best way to do it, is just to put people that work for the candidate in positions of power to decide the rules and how the endorsement process works, and so forth. So we have a problem we have to address. Now let's talk about Otter Tail County, because the last election cycle, two election cycles ago, the grassroots was very supportive of a state Senate candidate up in Otter Tail County, and Jordan Rasmussen was in the process of trying to move from the House to the Senate, and there was it looked like he wasn't going to get the endorsement, and all of a sudden some magical delegates showed up at the last minute. People claimed that they were never on a list, and so that endorsement was corrupted, and there were calls for an audit but to the state chair, and he didn't make any changes. And people were so upset about it that at the next caucus, so a year, 2 years later, they came back with enormous numbers and overwhelmed the establishment and took over basically every delegate slot in Otter Tail County, which became a threat to Fischbach. And so in response to that, the chair of Otter Tail County, who worked for Fischbach, invalidated worked with the state party to invalidate all the delegates in that county.
Yeah, there were, I forget the number, but it was quite a few people. It created, so Otter Tail County, for those that aren't knowledgeable or aren't close to Otter Tail County, it's a pretty rambunctious BPOU to begin with, and there's been division there for quite a bit. This just moved it up into the stratosphere, and a lot of contention. I was on the state party board and CD7, so I was a CD7 representative to the state party, so I kind of carried both roles. And I know a lot of people up in Otter Tail, kind of on both sides of this story. And so, of course, I was politely asked to try to help. And it was a natural fit for me. I wanted to be able to help. So I was in deep with it. It was brutal. And you have the best way I could describe Otter Tail County is it's it's a broken marriage to where they both really hate each other, sort of thing. But there was very level heads that basically went in and dove deep and said, what do we really have here? And it's never healthy to go play by play of what happened there, because so much happened. But there was legitimately these delegates that probably should have been seated. And at the state party, I led a resolution. The current chair of the state party, Alex Plekish, kind of carried a secondary one that kind of fit in with this. And we had a plan for Otter Tail County, and then none of it was followed.
Well, hang on a second. You said that there were people that legitimately should have been seated. Were there delegates in Otter Tail County that you believe should not have been seated?
Are you talking about from this last precinct caucus? So no, I don't know that I can even say that. I do know that Representative Jeff Backer, representative from the other side of Otter Tail.
Yeah.
Murphy.
Yep. Tom Murphy.
Yep. Tom Murphy. They went in and they had some help with some people. There's those that are as old as I am remember the dangling chads in Florida. And so it was sort of that sort of thing. Let's go in and look at the ballots and see what's really there. Well, they did a really good job of auditing against the paperwork that was at precinct caucuses with lists. They cross-reference things. And what Representative Jeff Backer is a good friend of mine. He said of all the, and I don't remember the number, 100 and something, I forget. There's a lot of them, maybe a couple hundred, maybe even 300. But of all of those, he said, if you want to say there's confusion or discrepancies, they found like either 5 or 6 names that had discrepancies. Now, they were showing that they were filed as delegates or alternates, but he said those, if you want to have an argument, those 5 or 6, but don't throw out all the other ones. And what the message that was being told is these precinct caucuses were chaotic and they weren't run right and people signed things too late, too early. My argument all along is that's the nature of precinct caucuses.
Yeah.
It just,
and they're run by volunteers. And you know, I talked to the former chair in a pretty heated conversation after that. And he said, well, the precinct chairs didn't convene the precinct caucus. And I said, that's not how we do it in rural Minnesota. We gather in a huge gymnasium and one person from the stage reads the script and goes through all the motions, because at my precinct, I'm the only person there. We have one little, I mean, we had probably 20 classrooms at our caucus when we broke into smaller groups, but in that classroom, one person led 14 precincts in there, right? And I'm the only person from Lincoln Township there. And so I fill out my delegate slot because there's only one delegate allowed. I'm not going to read a script to myself, right? I'm electing myself delegate, precinct chair, secretary, right? And I fill out the paperwork and put it in there. And it's because somebody didn't say that they were also the precinct chair, because the convener was presumed to be somebody, you know, in a position of power. It was just bogus. So he said, well, they didn't follow the rules and they didn't, you know, elect chairs or whatever. Well, there's only 1 or 2 people in each of these precincts.
Well, in the purpose of a precinct caucus is meant to facilitate participation. And as you said, you have volunteers, you have people that don't do all these things. And I was hearing, like, you know, armchair attorneys saying, well, it specifically says this right here. And I even brought up the point that in Princeburg, I sat at the table for the Princeburg precinct. There was 4 of us that showed up. You talk about the presidential primary.
Yeah.
There's 4 of us who showed up, and we had 5 delegate slots for Princeburg. And I'm overseeing, I'm convening, or I'm chairing, I don't forget what I'm called. But you're supposed to go through this formal process. Well, 4 of us knew each other.
Yeah.
And we're like, yeah, well, I'll just be delegates. And so I scribbled our names on the piece of paper. And then I handed it in, and well afterwards, the convener said, "No, you're supposed to sign this and this."
Right.
So I didn't sign it, and then I did. And so I actually went to the state party meeting, and I said, if you're talking about sticking to the letter of the law, then I should not be a delegate right now.
Because you didn't sign the form as the secretary.
We were invalidated, and I was told, now you're being ridiculous. And I go, well, which one do you want? The intent of the precinct caucuses is to get people, the heart and soul of a caucus system is getting in churches and city halls and stuff like that, and school cafeterias. and people talking. It's a lot cleaner. I came from Iowa when I saw the Iowa caucuses, and they just kind of assemble and they do their things one thing at a time. But it's meant to bring the message forward to the Republican Party, move people forward that you want represented you all the way up to the national convention, the whole process, right? But the first step of the process is going to be messy by nature, but have the intent to have people included. And in Otter Tail, the bigger problem so I came in on the Tea Party thing where they basically said, you've let your country slip away and now you should be participating. So I stepped forward and said, I need to get involved. In a similar vein, the people that showed up for precinct caucuses in Otter Tail last year are people that have never been involved in the process. Huge numbers that said, and they weren't there to take down Michelle Fischbach. They weren't there to take down the party. There were people there that maybe thought some of that stuff. But I talked to people who were just interested in participating in the American process, and they were told they weren't welcome. To the point, this is what really upset me. There was about 12 of them that drove from Otter Tail down to Edina to the state party, and we quite literally, the exec board, our door was locked to them. And then I went out in the hallway myself, and I think Alex Plekish and I think Jeff Backer was there to speak on their behalf, so he was there too, I seem to recall. But how symbolic is that the state party locked the door? And these were not rabble-rousers. I think the youngest person there was like 55 years old up to 75 or something like that. They weren't there to, burn down anything. They wanted to have their voice heard. And when I went into that hallway that night, so we're at the state party meeting, I go out in the hallway and I just thank them for coming down. It's a 2.5, probably 3.5 hour drive for some of them.
Yeah.
Okay. And they come down, they want their voice to be heard. And I just thanked them for coming. And one of them said, I don't understand what we did wrong. I was told to get involved and now I can't be involved. And I'm even being rejected. And then you have very nice people who they're kind of feeling like they're being told they're liars or rabble rousers or things like that. This is not the Republican Party. And so my hope for Otter Tail County, and it's going to be very difficult, but my hope is, I told them this when I ran for the CD7 position of representative of the state board. I said, we're going to have to reconcile. And part of reconciling is forgiving, and part of forgiving is just moving on from the past. Now, it's kind of funny because some of the people are like, oh, I'm ready to move on from the past as soon as those dirty rats from the other side curl up and die. I mean, they didn't say it that way, but that's basically what they're saying. So that has to be fixed. I hope it can be fixed, but it's going to have to be from the inside out, that they're willing to talk to each other, forgive each other, and kind of form something. Because that's one of the best BPOUs for the Republican Party in the state.
Yeah. Well, Olmsted County, on the opposite corner of the state down here in Rochester, was similar to Otter Tail, where they had this reckoning. It went in the opposite direction, though, where there was a bunch of establishment people there. Olmsted County has about a third of the delegates for CD1. And for many years, if you wanted to be a delegate to the state convention, you had to be on a list that they would have. So you had to apply. You couldn't just go there with friends and have them elect you delegate. You had to apply to the BPOU, and they basically said, if you've been involved for so many years and you've walked in parades and you've donated money, you get to be on the list. So they would put up a slate of like 75 delegates to the state convention, and that's who they were voting yes or no on that list. And so people got really upset because when Scott Jensen ran, Scott brought a ton of people into the party that had not participated before, and he taught them how to caucus. And so they all got involved. They got blocked like Otter Tail. They got upset. They came back with record numbers, and they threw out all of their board members, and they probably have like 40 people on the board in Olmsted County, and they elected, with Wendy Phillips as chair. And then this year, they left, and so kind of I don't want to say the establishment took over, but they kind of ceded ground in Rochester.
I think we need to have an attitude of how do we encourage people to participate, and it's human beings. They're going to have strong opinions. They're not. One of my biggest arguments is they're trying to go by letter of the law, and people should do this and do that. I go, these are intelligent people, but they're inarticulate to the system, or they don't speak in front of people. Not all of us can be on a podcast. There's many people that would die to have to be in front of a microphone, much less do some of these things. How can we find a pathway for people to be involved? There was a lot of young people up in Otter Tail that were trying to get involved, which is what we're begging for in the Republican Party, right? Yep. They weren't allowed in.
Yeah. Well, I think the endorsement process is the way to go. We need to clean up some of the corruption with people that work for candidates, get them out of the executive boards so that the grassroots can really have the party again. Now, there are some seats in Minnesota where we are darn lucky to have the Republican, in air quotes, that we have. And I will go to their endorsing convention and speak on behalf of this squishy Republican and remind the delegates, look, I know you want, Tim Miller 2.0 here, but Karen Housley is as conservative as we can get, in this district. I don't know what her district is now. I think it's actually more conservative than it was, but there are some people that we're lucky to have. But for the most part, we shouldn't be reelecting squishy Republicans in deep red districts. And then when we get to St. Paul, they can deal with this caucus where they have a whole bunch of conservatives and a few moderates that they have to make excuses for. And like what we have now with with the numbers in St. Paul, it's tough to legislate and they have to make some accommodations for those members. But for the most part, they need to let the grassroots choose the candidates. So Otter Tail County update, they're having their convention. They were supposed to have it in the window that BPOUs were supposed to have them in, and then it didn't happen because the establishment was pushing back on that. What's going to happen now? Is it going to be next weekend?
I believe it's this upcoming weekend because the following weekend is CD7. So I would assume it's this weekend. And I spoke with someone, not confirming this, but not from Otter Tail, but someone who's going up there to help with the convention. They were told that the state party is going to honor what happens up at the Otter Tail convention.
They're going to honor what happens.
Well,
so what if the police are called and nobody's allowed in?
However, I'm also being told by the same person, and I can't give you an exact number, but there's reportedly many people that are being told they cannot be part of the convention. And this is a very dangerous thing because, first of all, the attitude of people participating, it goes against that. But you can't exclude these people forever because there's cycles, there's precinct caucuses, there's all this other stuff. And when someone says you just cannot come in, not only do you face a volatile situation, you potentially face a legal situation. And, it really hurts. If there's one thing that hurts about this, so I'm in CD7, so Otter Tail is part of that. And this is one of the stronghold Republican regions of the state of Minnesota. And we need them to move forward and be successful in the state. And the more that they fight amongst themselves, the less impactful they are and the trouble it is for the Republican Party. And by the way, they're very concerned all across the board, the exception of one or two key people. They're actually very conservative up in Otter Tail County.
Well, okay. So what I'm just trying to backtrack. So what you just told me is that the state party is going to honor what happens at the Otter Tail convention. But I'm also being told that they're telling like 50 or 60 people, you are no longer a delegate because of whatever reason.
Whatever. That's my understanding. And I'm not saying it even makes sense. In the last couple Otter Tail conventions, things have occurred that have either not made sense or they forced things through that probably weren't proper. So what it looks like, I don't know. I do know that the state party, so let's just say Otter Tail County Convention, they have a convention and they forward delegates forward to CD7, okay, in the state central delegates. The state party is going to honor those, even though they're outside the window of what was defined.
So they'll honor late delegates. But what I want to hear is that the state party has reviewed the delegate list from precinct caucuses, and that they will be there to ensure that those delegates, all of the delegates elected at precinct caucus, are allowed in.
There's plenty of people that say that it's an invalid list. I don't agree with that. I took a very, very clear position that I believe that those delegates and those alternates are accurate, but for, as Representative Backer said, there might be 5 or 6, but you're talking 5 or 6 out of, if memory serves, it's like 300 or something like that.
So,
it's a very large number.
And I had heard the number of delegates that won't be allowed at this convention are like in the 60 to 70.
That's range. What I heard too. I just don't remember the number.
So, and that the person that's crossing the names off,
it's arbitrary,
is an employee of Fishbach.
Yes.
So why can't we, I mean, you're friends with Alex Plekish. Why can't you call him and say, get up there and make sure these people are allowed in?
In fairness to Alex, so the state party has authority. We're going to get in the weeds here, folks. So hopefully we can just kind of keep this simple. The state party has the power to certify or decertify a BPOU, because a BPOU is a political party unit under the state party. So every year, actually, I think to the Secretary of State, they say, these are our identified political party units underneath the state party, which, by the way, the House caucus and Senate caucus are part of that too.
Yep.
That's where the state party has authority. The Republican Constitution and bylaws, the way they're set up, we are a bottom-up, not a top-down organization. And so the state party, in the end, does not have authority to tell Otter Tail County what to do as an organization. They can only say, yes, you're an organization, or no, you are not. And so you'd like to think that the party chair would have great authority in a situation like this. But when I was still on the state exec board, we passed as a board resolutions that were supposed to give a course for Otter Tail County that in the end were diluted and never followed through on. If they were followed through on, those delegates would be allowed at this convention this year. But you cannot force Otter Tail County to do that. Now, I'm a relational person. I'm a Christian man, and I only bring that up because of conflict resolution in the Christian world is, look at the log in your own eye before the speck in the other person's eye. I don't want to tie scripture into what's going on in our tale. I just want to give you my perspective. There's be merciful, be humble, defer, forgive, and move on. Christ forgave us, therefore we should forgive others. So with that perspective in mind, I've really been trying to impress on Otter Tail to both sides. If you truly want to move forward, you're going to have to forgive and move forward. And I don't mean to be flippant, but I basically get from both sides, screw you, Miller. It's like they just aren't interested. And they will say, but so-and-so did this to me. And they probably really did. Okay. It's valid. There are some crappy things that people have done to each other up there. I one time late last spring, this precinct caucus thing, it was like a full-time job, and that's not hyperbole. I was working on it 7 days a week, and I was exasperated, and I was talking to someone on the board, and I said, you know what you guys need to do? I said, so Thumper Pond is where they have a lot of their meetings. I said, get a room in Thumper Pond, get everyone in a room, pick your 5 best people on each side, and just get into a fist fight. Last man standing is right. You're being absurd. And I go, that's what you guys really want to do. You really want to throw a fist. Now, I'm not promoting fights, but it makes the point that that's honestly, if people want to understand Otter Tail County, that's where they're at. Okay. Minnesotans wanting to fight. What a contradiction of terms that is, right? But that's really bottom line where we're at. So if people want to understand the Otter Tail situation, so when you say, well, can the party chair do this and make them do this? We can't technically make him, but should his influence carry the day there? He's trying. Just don't get on, I guess anyone listening, don't get on the chair's case if it doesn't succeed. That's not the measure of whether he's doing his job or not, because it is about impossible up in Otter Tail County until these people are legitimately ready to lay it down, lay the arms down, and get in a room and talk about things.
Well, I think it's going to be really important for Republicans to come together in Otter Tail County, find a resolution, because we need to get more people involved. Sometimes when we have on the federal level, we control the House, we control the Senate, we control the White House. And in most people's mind, everything is peachy. And when we are in the majority, federal level, people tend to stay home, especially in the midterms. And we need people to get involved and find a candidate, especially next year, running for governor, running for U.S. Senate. Minnesota is somewhat in play. People talk about the U.S. Senate. When you look at the U.S. Senate slate, the crystal ball of who's going to win, Minnesota is about as close to a get as we can find out there. There's not many.
Yeah.
There's not many swing districts, and so there's going to be eyes on Minnesota, and the establishment will say, "Well, we need to find a serious candidate." They're not happy about Royce White. I would encourage people to look at Adam Schwartzy, who's running. But there's going to be the Julia Colemans out there too that are going to jump into that race and see if they can make a run. But if we don't have people, activists going out to caucus and getting involved and carrying the banner and walking in parades and all that kind of stuff, we're not going to get the word out and we're not going to win.
You know, at the risk of digressing, after I went on my little rant, all I can think about is when you put this on Facebook or something, it's going to come out. Former Representative Miller wants people to fight. He wants to throw the first punch or something.
Well, I can guarantee you that your distant cousin Nathan Miller from Otter Tail is probably watching this too. So, you know, we should do a podcast with him to talk about that, to hear more of his side of it, because it's convoluted, and I want it to be resolved. And I think the path forward is to purge the party of people with heavy conflicts of interest that we talked about earlier.
I think that's important. Also,
and I'm sorry, I didn't mean purge. I meant they can participate. They can be delegates even, but they can't be leading the party.
Thank you. Thank you for trumping, getting me in trouble. Now you're in more trouble. I also think, and this is wishing a lot, but Otter Tail's a good example of, and this is difficult, but if you can separate out personalities and personal things from the job that is at hand, which is difficult, I appreciate, but where people are most upset with each other up in Otter Tail are personal interactions. You know, someone felt personally threatened, or someone felt personally offended, or they were misrepresented. To be honest, most, if not all of that stuff is true. It is true. I don't think that you can disregard what is being said there. But to the goal that we're talking about of running for the U.S. Senate and things like that, I'm not asking you to forget about those things, but figure out a pathway for Otter Tail County and other counties. That there's a couple others, you know, what is it? CD2 in general is kind of a little bit
CD2
disenfranchised right now. Republicans, let's find the pathway. We don't all have to hug, but we need to find a pathway to get Republicans elected and get the right Republicans elected. And if we do spend our time fighting with each other, which, by the way, I have no problem with arguing, disagreeing in the caucus room. I was a big fan of it. That was the place to do it. But you have to know when to come together and realize the mission at hand, and you get the job done. When you keep fighting during all of that process, you solve nothing and create new problems.
Very good. All right, what's your prediction that's going to happen at the for the end of session, Tim? The Minnesota legislature.
So what's going to happen is there's either going to be one giant omnibus bill that won't have, it's mostly going to be about spending this year, or the budget itself. You're not going to see much policy. You might see some agency things that people want, but there's going to be one large, what do we call those monster bills?
Garbage omnibus bill. Omnibus prime
bill. There's going to be something like that, and the leadership's going to put it together. I think the leadership's going to put together, even if they're broken up into just kind of large omnibus bills. They're going to balance the budget. There's going to be a lot of hold your nose stuff. I don't know how in a $6 billion deficit they're going to do it, but they're going to spend new money. They're going to raise taxes. They're going to raise fees. And it's going to be a pig of a bill for this average citizen in Minnesota. This is not going to end well.
Will there be Democrats that vote against it? No. All Democrats will vote for it, and will.
I actually think in the House, all Republicans will vote for it.
Oh, you don't think there'll be a few that
there might be, if they have separate bills, there might be a few that kind of stray here and there, or they're allowed to, or out of conviction, some might vote no. You and I have been in that caucus room, and there's there's immense pressure, and it's hard to explain, but there's immense pressure to not be that person who's the troublemaker in a caucus that by and large, there aren't really any troublemakers there right now. Like you and I were troublemakers, different ways, but we were.
Yeah, Drew Roach, I would say.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
He's a guy of principle. And I think he's following in the footsteps of Cal Barr. I think he'll be unwavering.
Okay, good. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. So will there be a couple people that vote against it?
In the Senate, a lot of Republicans will vote against it.
Well, but they'll also be able to, if you want to say it that way,
they'll be able to in the House, because they only need 2 Republicans and all Democrats to vote for it.
Yeah, and maybe that is the way that the leadership does it, is they say we're going to, because there's going to be pressure on the Republican leadership to get the budget passed. I get it, okay? And they'll probably be given some favors in that process. So maybe you're right. Maybe there's just going to be a couple people that vote for it, if you want to call it this way, that can get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
I still think you're going to see, by and large, Republicans not only voting for it, but I predict that they're going to come back out of session and say, boy, did we do great things against the Democrats, even though it's really a Democrat bill.
I'm going to make a really bold prediction right here, so you guys can clip it and feed it back to me if I'm wrong. But one Republican that will vote for that large omnibus bill in the Senate, Senator Jennifer Carnahan. Because she lives in Eichorn's district, and she was recently elected mayor of Nisswa, which is basically my own stomping ground. I grew up there, and I think that she is going to run for state senate, and to get back. I mean, she's kind of in politics. She came back and ran for mayor, which is nonpartisan, but I think she will dump the bank in winning that Senate seat.
So I should clarify something. By me doing things like this, I don't support Jennifer Carnahan in the state Senate, but because I'm retired and I'm a full-time RVer, I refer to myself as a recovering politician. And so there's a level of kind of sort of a sick happiness, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Schadenfreude?
Sure, Schadenfreude. To see just dysfunction be fully dysfunctional. So if you want to, so off of that question, what do I think I'm going to see by end of session? Everything you will see is going to be after Easter. Anything before Easter is going to be a lot of posturing. There's a role for that, so I don't want to totally denigrate that, but the real meat and potatoes of session is going to be after Easter, especially the final 2-3 weeks. It's going to be wild, but if you want to know about when the primary is, or how they're spending money, or if there's new taxes, or how they're spending that there's new taxes, but there aren't, whatever the case may be, that's when to really pay attention. Anything you see right now is a little bit of smoke and mirrors or pageantry. It just, the nature of the legislature, there's not a lot that's going on right now.
It's normally committee work, and you're working on improving bills through committee, but the House has been complete disarray. They gave up a whole month of committees that were basically shredded, and everything's going to be decided by, 5 people, maybe 6 people in a closed room.
Yes.
It
happened twice when we were there, and we had normal majorities.
Yeah. It's crazy. And you're going to hear very little from elected legislators about how unfair it is. There'll be a few principled people that say, this is bogus. We were elected and we're not participating. And then they're going to force feed us these bills at the last minute, like they usually do. And they'll vote for it. And I think Jennifer Carnahan is going to vote no in the Senate. Actually, you know what? I'll make another prediction. If it isn't Jennifer Carnahan, it's Senator Kerry Heinzman.
And I'd actually like to see that. So if the Heinzmans hear this, I worked with Kerry in the state party, knew her a little bit outside of that because of Josh, but I got to know her. She's very principled. She is sharp. She's very smart. So Kerry, if you're listening, think about running for the Senate, and Josh is probably tell you don't listen to Miller. So
would she outrank him? I think she would.
I think she already does.
Okay, well, that's my prediction. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Omnibus Podcast. I know that in the beginning of the show, I talk about it being a weekly podcast, and that's actually spelled WEAK. So I don't do it weekly. But Tim is sitting at my place for another week, and we should wrangle him out and do another podcast.
This is a lot of fun. This has been a treat. I've done some podcasts in the past, and I love talking with you, Jeremy. We're kind of two sides of the same coin, and both of us, even as I say that, it makes him wince a little bit, and even as I say it makes me wince, but we get along very well. We have a slightly different perspective. We were in the trench, we were in the foxhole together at the Newhouse Republican Caucus with the RFL.
Oh yeah, we started
you
the
and
RFL
I started
together.
the RFL. And
the Republican Farmer Labor Caucus. God, that was so fun.
That was so fun, especially when they sued us or they didn't sue us. They sent us a cease and desist letter.
Yeah, the DFL did, saying they own. Oh yeah, there's the RFL. It's got my pencils in it. Yeah.
Can't really see it too well.
We should bring the caucus sign the next. I got one in my shop. The old the aluminum painted Newhouse Republican Caucus sign. So we were in the trenches together, and it's been great. We both left at the same time, probably at the right time, and watching our colleagues suffer in this mess of a tied legislature now. So, all right. Well, thanks for tuning in for another episode, and we will see you again next time. Here, 1,000-page omnibus bills that nobody knows what's in it.